Okay, so where we left off in this series is that we just created a worker server for our scaled application, and I called it SL for scaling Laravel Q1. And the implication there, of course, is that you can create as many worker servers as you want or need for your application. Now, we still have this question of what to do for cron tasks. Cron is kind of an interesting thing because typically you only want to run cron tasks on one single server. And the reason you want to do that is because typically it'll run a command in your Laravel app and you only really want that to be run once. It's not something you typically want to run on every single server every minute or every 5 minutes or however often you set your cron tasks to run. So we need to make a decision here. If we're not on Laravel 5.6 yet, which is out in February 2018, which is a few months after this video is being created, then we have to make a decision because Laravel 5.6 is going to have a feature that will make this very easy. And we're actually going to see a preview of that in the next video. But right now, if we're not in Laravel 5.6 yet, we need to make a decision. So we can basically, as it is right now, do one of two things. We can decide on one server to run our cron tasks. So it could be app 1 or app 2 or our worker server 1. Or we can create a new server, and that server's job will just be to run cron tasks. Now, this, of course, depends on budget and things like that in your case. You can choose one server to run cron. It's not really my favorite choice because if you need to replace that server, you might forget to enable a cron task on that server. And if things are automated, then you need to write extra code to make sure cron is running on a server if a server gets destroyed and then replaced or something like that. So the best case solution right now as Laravel stands is to make a single server that runs cron tasks. Now, of course, no one's going to bite your head off for deciding to do the cheaper route and not make another server purely for cron tasks, because of course we're all working within the constraints of our environment, whether it's budgetary constraints or just how many servers you want to manage yourself and all that kind of stuff. So whatever you decide, of course, is okay. What I'm going to do is make a new server in this video. It'll be just like our worker server, except it's not going to run a worker. Instead of a worker, we're going to set up a cron task. So go to DigitalOcean. I'm going to call it Scaling Laravel Cron. I'm not going to number it because we'll just have one cron server. Now, the size of your server, I'm going to do 2 gigabytes here again. Now, typically when people make cron tasks, they do one of two things. A cron task might run and do its processing immediately as soon as the cron task runs a artisan command within Laravel. Or when the cron fires our artisan command, that artisan command might just dispatch a job into the queue. And if you dispatch a job into queues and you don't actually have your cron server processing anything heavy, you can go ahead and make a small server because all that server is going to do is just fire jobs off into a queue. That's a strategy that's very valid. It's a very good strategy that I like to use as well. So the cron server, the cron task, does very little work. All it does is maybe do some light processing, and then it makes jobs that go into the queue, and the queue workers actually do the work. But not everyone can do that use case. You might be pulling in third-party packages that don't use queues, or your own code might not be queue friendly. Whatever your situation is, your cron server might actually be processing stuff that will actually take up RAM and CPU when it runs that PHP artisan command. So I'll just go ahead and do a 2 gigabyte server. We'll assume that I have some cron tasks that are going to do some processing that are not inside of queues. PHP 7.1, that's still the default as of this video. No database, post-provision recipe. I'm not going to show you running that. I'm just going to know that I'm going to run the worker server one because that's the exact same for cron. I'm turning off PHP and Nginx and all that stuff because we're not serving web requests out of our cron server. No database, not a load balancer, no backups. Let's go ahead and create it. Okay, so we have our cron server, and once that is done building, we'll continue on with setting up our application on the server and then setting up the cron task. Now, while that is going, we can actually make one. I don't have any of my sample application here, but we can do PHP artisan make command, and let's do the help flag there. I'm going to make some command for it to run. I'll name it, and I'll just say what the command will be. So we'll do PHP artisan make command. The command that I want is going to be scaling Laravel example. And the name is just going to be example command. Okay, so that is created. Let's head on over to code and check it out. It's going to be in console, and under commands, we're going to have our example command, and our example command is going to have this signature. And I'm not going to do anything here because it doesn't matter the details of it. I'm just going to have it sleep for 3 seconds, and we're just going to pretend that it does some processing there. It'll just sleep for 3 seconds in our case, though. So once that's done, I have to register that in our kernel. Now here is the interesting thing, right? So schedule command, inspire hourly, that's our example one. I'm going to do schedule command, and that's going to be the command we just created, which was scaling Laravel example, and I'm going to do it every minute. Now this is actually code in our code base, right? So this is going to be set in every one of our instances of our application on every server. But this is not necessarily going to run this command every minute on every server because we're only going to set the cron task up on one of the servers, on that cron server we just created. So let's just go here and do PHP artisan, and we are going to do SL example and just let it run, and that's just going to take 3 seconds, and it's going to return nothing at all, but we'll see that that actually did take 3 seconds and it's done. So added example command, and this will get deployed up to each one of our servers, and that command will be available. So let's head on over here, back to Forge, and we're still waiting for this to finish. And once the server is finished provisioning, we'll move on with setting up the application on the server and then setting up that cron task so that our cron server is the one thing responsible for running cron tasks for our application. All right, so this is finished. Let's just make sure Laravel can connect, or I should say Forge can connect, and it can. Great. So SL cron. Of course, we need to set up a site for it. So just like everything else, we're going to do forge.scalinglaravel.com. It's going to be in the public, it's general Laravel. We're going to add site, and we just need to add that so that we can get a code base, a GitHub repository, into the server. We're not actually going to access this specific server over the web. And it's scaling-laravel, forge.scalinglaravel.com from branch master, install dependencies. Let's go ahead and get that repository onto the server. Now, while that's going and doing that, I'm going to grab my Q1 server, and we are going to go into the application there and grab the environment file from that server. Because remember, we need to copy and have the same environment file in each server. And I also want to have the queue driver here set as database, just in case we do fire queues from our cron task commands. So copy that, we'll close this window, and back here we can go to environment and add that same environment here to our cron server. Okay, so that's in the cron server application. We can get rid of our PHP FPM 7.1 reload. I'll do quick deploy and deploy now. Let's just make sure this works. And I did forget something here. We can check out our job and we'll see connection timed out. So we didn't set up the networking correctly. So we need to go back out to the cron server and go to networking, and we say this server can connect to the cache server and the database server just like last time. So update the network, and while it's going, we'll clear out that notification. Networking is finished, so we can go back to sites and go back into forge.scalinglaravel.com and do a deploy now, and we'll make sure that this works this time. And down here, actually, I realized I did this, reload. I need to save that script to actually make sure that change stays there. So view deployment log, and this looks like it worked great. Perfect. Okay, so that's great. We should be all set. PHP FPM won't get reloaded whenever we deploy. And now we have a server with our code on it. It's not accepting web requests, not acting as a queue worker. Instead, we want to set up cron on it. Now, cron is not an application level setting. So I'm going to back up to the cron server here, and that's a server-side setting. So we can go to scheduler here, and we can set our schedule to run. Now, the schedule run command is meant to be run every minute, and then that will go and run your scheduler in your code, and it will actually run your jobs based on what we have in code here. So mine happens to also be every minute, or it could be hourly, or it could be any number of other settings. So you can, on your server, set this to run every minute to run the schedule run command, but on your server in your code, it's going to say what commands actually get run and how often. So it's a very handy thing where you can have this in code instead of just on cron tasks. And then in cron, you just always set it to run every minute. So we're going to do user forge, home forge default. Now we're not running in default. Instead, we are in folder forge.scalinglaravel.com. And then it's running the artisan command, and it's going to run schedule run. So this is in fact going to run our cron task on our cron server that we are on right now for us. And this will be the one server that actually runs our cron tasks. So to reiterate, this is one of the valid strategies that I like for running cron in a distributed environment where you have multiple servers. You can make a server, and that server's job is just to run cron tasks. And those cron tasks can do anything. They can actually run jobs, and those jobs can be expensive or not expensive, long running or not long running. Or you can have your cron tasks in code fire off jobs into the queue, and then the queue workers actually take care of it. So all the cron is doing some late processing and then firing jobs into the queue, which is a very nice way to structure your program so that your queue workers actually do the bulk of the work, and your cron server can be purely responsible just for running some quick jobs and firing stuff into the queue. Of course, that's kind of a best case scenario, so you have to work with whatever you have, whatever your constraints are. But in any case, we've set up a cron server, we have that cron server up and running with our code, and now it's running the scheduler every minute for our forge.scalinglaravel.com site. Now in the next video, I'm going to cover Laravel's 5.6 feature where we can actually run cron on every single server, and Laravel will be smart enough to actually only allow that job to run on one server at a time. We won't know what server, and we're actually thankful for that. We don't have to know. It'll take care of a lot of the gritty work of making sure that that cron task is actually only going to run once on one server. And that way we can set up each server the exact same way no matter what and not have to worry about what server is running our cron tasks. And we can get rid of this cron server so that we don't have to pay or manage that extra infrastructure.